Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a rather sedate day, circumstantially, weather-wise, sunlight-wise, here in San Francisco. I want to take a moment to honor with great reverence all of the beings who sought in their lives and dreams and strivings and hopes and faith and action to seek freedom for all beings, to seek insight and playful wonder and joy, to embody that, to enact that. I remember them, and I invite them in spirit and in virtue to participate, to use my body and mind as their vehicle, to remember we who live and are incarnate, to join us in love, in companionship, in beauty. So welcome to all those beings and the spirit of their endeavors and dreams. You know, we have all these words in English. Few of us understand their origins and natures, and the alphabet itself is a profound, astonishing library of magical and mysterious and accessible transcendental intelligence. Words like remember, right? This is a word that indicates recalibration under the spirit of communion, mutual awareness, concern, care, love, virtue, beauty, truth not as in facts. It's a very dangerous kind of truth that is mostly nonsensical and native to a specific layer of concern. So yeah, who is memory? The incredibly beautiful word that the Greeks had. And I'm very curious if any of you know other words that point in the same direction but come from different cultures or times. This beautiful word, which can be pronounced in different ways. I've always pronounced it mnemosyne. And I've mentioned before that Captain Nemo, the brilliant protector of the oceans and the enemy of human war, the enemy of human hubris. Captain Nemo, right, his name, he is the avatar of memory, of mnemosyne. Right? This is how he gets that name. And now this may or may not be factually true. Right? Jules Verne, who I think was writing in the late 1800s, might have that wrong. One of the first science fiction authors I encountered in my life, when I was around 4 or 5, very young. And his stories were, and the films that were made of them were profoundly seminal in instructing my own concerns. Like any child, might, particularly a male child, I wanted to be Captain Nemo. And then when I got a little older, there was a human avatar of a very similar spirit, who actually was a human being in my life, who had a similar effect, Jacques Cousteau. And so what's interesting is Jacques could be understood as a male avatar, protector of the feminine oceans, the waters, which are themselves a instantiation of a feature native to time space, but also to the dandelion, to origin, that I refer to as the living waters. And think of as a being transcendental to the kinds of beings we have words for, transcendental even to the idea of a god. The oceans of Earth are an instantiation of the characters and qualities native to the living waters and also to memory. Sarah Jane's the brilliant dream incubator, dreaming avatar of the dreaming intelligences, and she's not the only one, but she's a really brilliant and enthusiastic exemplar. And probably Maria Marigu. I have interviews with both of these astonishing women on my channel. I think they would suggest that the correct pronunciation of the name of the Greek mother of the Muses, who is understood to be memory, except that we moderns tend to pose identities and even situations in single valued terms. Right? This is that. End of, like period. Right? We know what it is now. And the ancients were not, with notable exceptions, they were not inclined. Neither were most of the indigenous cultures, though. Again, both of these things are typologies, and you can find exemplars just like you would expect of many different ways of knowing and speaking and thinking. But generally speaking, I think the weight of the yeah, I'm about to become a victim of my own, right? Because it's very difficult to escape this single-valued thinking thing. You can try, you can go through contortions and all kinds of things. There's a better move than suggesting that something is wrong, which is do three things that are better. And I'll try to embody the spirit of that in this talk. But they suggested that the name was Mnemosyne, right? So you pronounce the M. It's M-N-E-M-O-S-Y-N-E, Mnemosyne. And this was not merely the mother of the Muses to the Greeks. Like the sun, without which you have zero phenomena around here that are familiar. No minds, no arguments, no religions, no math, no science, nothing. I think for the Greeks, mnemosyne or mnemosyne was basically the mother of the possibility space of all experience. The invisible sun, or an invisible sun, because there may be more than three, that lights our interiority. Think how strange it would be if you had no memory, right? The entailments of this are very profound to consider.
Have a coffee.
It would be impossible for you to hold experience in awareness long enough to do anything about it, or even really respond to it. And this is just if you had no sort of cognitive memory, right? If you were without representational memory. It'd be very catastrophic to the capacity to organize awareness. Although, at the same time, right, no single valuedness. What you'd probably prefer is to have both, right? To be able to switch back and forth between a traceless, non-memorial aspect or mode of awareness and the aspect that preserves traces and compares them and connects them and evaluates them, not just in the representational way, but in the way, for example, the dreaming mind does naturally. It's very profound. But you can take this much further and see that the entire physical layer is both the living body of mnemosyne, of memory, right? Your ancestors, the quote gene pool, unquote, the forms that reproduce. There's quite a bit of wind right now. Hopefully my buffer is functioning reasonably well. We will see. Please bear with me. Yeah, all of this is, the sun, right? Billions of stars died. In a representational framework, right, the sun is composed of the, it's a localization and concretion over the lifespans of specific stars, but also stars in general. So they die, they spread material all over time-space, you get nebula, you have features like the Starbirth Nebula, where new, embryonic stars are forming. Some of those will succeed, some not, lots of different things can happen, just like in a human birth. So this memory thing is profound. Without it, you got nada. There's no you to have nada, right? It's worse than you got nothing. There's no one to have the nothing that doesn't exist. When we're taught how to think, most of us, unless we have education in the arts, sciences, perhaps some degree the humanities, psychology, physics, math, science, which are usually taught in lethally boring and confusing ways for children. Very few people know how to light the children on fire. And you don't even have to light them on fire, you just have to not put out the fire that's already in them. Right? To not inhibit that natural curiosity and playfulness, wonder. So, I remember I had one math teacher in guess it was 5th grade, could probably come up with his name, at Tully C. Knowles, who was at least capable of instilling some sense of wonder into his pedagogy. And I remember him fondly. I'm pretty sure that for Halloween, he hit my hot button by reading The Telltale Heart to us, right? Which is not, right? Which is, oh God. So it's so appropriate for a math teacher because the man who is clearly both a prodigy and has lost his mind has murdered his elderly roommate who has this disgusting, filmy single eye, and has hidden the parts of the body in the house, and you can hear the heartbeat in the walls. And he's sure that the investigators that come, who actually don't suspect him of the murder, can also hear that heartbeat. And we got some combat going on. Oh, it's flipped over. The aggressor has become the pursued. The aggressor had a firm grip on the neck of his victim. I'd be extremely surprised, actually. People like to say, like, there's no gender norms. There's no such thing as gender in nature. Those people are out of their fucking minds. And similar, they're just as, dumb in their way, are the people who say, like, there's no variance over gender. It's all the same thing. Both people are blind. Gender's very complex. But I'd be very surprised if there was ever... It's possible. I mean, the world is diverse. I'd be very surprised if there were combat between females. I think it's... Yeah, chill out. I'm not messing with you. The geese are touchy right now because it's mating and childbearing time. What a beautiful sweater.
Thank you.
So where was I when the goose combat interrupted me? Yeah, the aggressor had a firm grip on the neck of his opponent, but then in the moment when the opponent escaped that grip, the power system flipped over, and the aggressor fled. So yeah, the gender thing, right? Physical gender is a real thing. Are there examples of Twilight? Yes. Does that mean physical gender doesn't exist? No. Are the human conceptions of gender too limited? Yes. Should we throw them away? No. These are very simple ways of being aware of the complexity of the actual situation which we're in, which defies all rational explanation entirely, right? And yet the derivations we can make over the continua are also important and useful and profound in their way. So, I'm a proponent of nuanced methods and ways of understanding complex phenomena that don't trap us in the low rungs of the ladder of thought, awareness, understanding, liberation, and so forth. It's also true that some portion of the gender equilibrium situation is fake. Right? Yet there are principles, right, that are important not to lose sight of. We can change our interpretations of them. There were people, certainly are people, who, if they were asked to gender the sun, would gender it as feminine. And there's a good argument for that, which is that the principle of gravity, right, can easily be understood as a feminine principle. The subtle force that pervades overall existence, drawing things together. In a way not dissimilar to how the female womb draws together so many astonishing features of the impossible, the possible, the probable, the likely, the semi-determinate.
It sounds much fun in the summer because it's cold. It's not hot.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's not something I would.
Guy's unusually intelligent, I can tell just by how he's speaking. This isn't the only way to see. The testicles are doing something similar, right? So I don't want to get lost in this topic, but the polarity, generally, the feminine stays local and sends out agents, right? And the masculine travels everywhere and brings back assets. And there's unique implementations of that principle in both genders. And there's inversions of that principle in both genders. So there's no simple map that tells you what stuff is, right? What it's doing. But there are peoples who conceived of the sun as feminine, and the moon or the earth is masculine, or the earth is masculine and the sky is feminine. None of these are wrong. They're not that kind of knowledge, right? They're not the kind of knowledge that either it's right or it's wrong. In fact, most of awareness, insight, and understanding has little to do with getting it right. What it actually has to do with is leveraging what you've so far understood to achieve three better positions, one of which is fundamentally oriented to repeating that success and achieving 5 better positions and collapsing those, and creating 7 better positions and collapsing those to 3, and so forth. Right? This is how actual insight, cognitively anyway, I think relationally too. You see, there's like, this is an age of experts who do this all the time. They're well aware of this principle. They're also aware that there are no real limits to who you can become, how much better you can learn to see or perform, right? If you have a meta principle that's driving your developmental aspects, underlying them, supporting them, that's really good, it can be applied to any domain of human thought, behavior, seeking, anything. This is natural to human beings. This is what the teachers of our children should empower our children with. Right? The meta principles, not here, do these equations and show me how you did your work. There's an earthworm in the path. and it's very vitally alive. And I moved it off into the earth. There's the rear end of an earwig sticking out. And now the earthworm is finding its way into safety. And hopefully prosperity in earthworm terms. I adore the living beings. I feel constantly a sense of deep communion, and I think in this way too, with all of the beings, to give them gentle, loving concern, to the best of our human abilities. Is an amazing and beautiful way of becoming more human and more than human together. So I was listening a moment ago to an Essentia Foundation podcast with an extremely unfortunate title. Something like "The Quantum is All in Our Minds." And I know where the title comes from now, having listened to most of the podcast. It comes from the difference between two approaches that are distinguished by the term psiontic, right? We're finding out what exists, right? Seeing into what exists. And something that I think was called psi-epistemic, oh wow. This mom, she bred early and very successfully. She's got 6 children. And they look pretty healthy. And you can see that some of them will become males by the unique features of their wing feathers. I'm just going to mention that in many cultures, the children are not really seen as male or female until they differentiate in puberty. Or that's not actually true. All the children are seen as female. They are aware of their genitalia. And they probably have, categorical language about that. But what actually you have to it's kind of a similar principle, relatively confused in modernity, is, a young male must become a man, right? Man up. Thankfully, there's a billion different ways of chasing that strange distinction, and also very normal distinction. So the psiontic stuff, it proposes that we see what's happening. That there are actually facts, which would be justified true beliefs about the character, nature, function, form, origin, causality, and so forth of phenomena. And I would argue that it's only possible to have that in a very thin layer, and it's a mostly representational layer. And then psi-epistemic, which they might have had a shorter term for it, like psi-epis or something, psi-episteme, proposes that the knowledge we have is human knowledge. It is never commensurate with the ontic, right? That which is. And I favor that dramatically, the psi-epistemic, that our knowledge forms are not commensurate with the phenomena, and the very modest degree to which they capture and leverage those captures is deceptive and compelling because it resembles certain parts of our embodied daily experience. But there's a feature that I want to explore today. And it's conceivable that I've misapprehended this. In other words, when I say there are entailments of relativity that we failed to import into the concepts, categories, and systems of evaluation that we are familiar with, which are actually very, very slow to develop in the general population, and also they're not just slow to develop, they devolve. They go down the ladder toward less useful, less veritable positions, and they tend to entrench the process of loss, right? Loss of insight. So we think about things, beings, in the world, identities, and we use evaluatory methods and so forth that come from, they correlate with Newtonian ideas, like the kind of the gross macro level of phenomena. And Einstein was revolutionary. We should have imported the entailments of his findings if we took them seriously. We took them seriously enough to make the atomic bomb, but not seriously enough to forge intelligent minds or societies in their wake, using their principles and entailments, which is unfortunate, yet that we can still do that, right? Which is part of my game. That's part of what I'm chasing. That sounds like there's a raptor. The corvids and the raptors, my goodness. Eternal semi-enmity. It's not exactly enmity. They inform each other's development and they're very intimate. It's not just like, oh, these are enemies in a single value sense at all. For example, corvids may become extremely upset if they see a human interacting disrespectfully with a raptor, or particularly the corpse of a raptor, which they seem to have incredible reverence for. And if they were just enemies, how would that behavior be emergent? So back to this relativity thing. Similarly, the humans don't take the still very naive and preliminary understandings that we might derive from quantum field theory, QFT, or quantum electrodynamics, and import into how we think about the world, relationships, individuals, and unities, whether our findings are psiontic or psi-epistemic. But I want to give a few examples, and I may have this wrong. I don't think I do, but I might. And even if I do have it wrong, the perspective is still useful. This is a principle very few humans are aware of. They think that, they tend to think that limited evaluations that produce high verity, right, highly reliable outcomes okay, where am I going here? Yeah, we seem to think that we authorize and give precedence to epistemic toys that you can validate evidence, with evidence in a system with methods. And if physics or even biology, in fact biology much more so, if they tell us anything, what they're telling us is that the scope of purchase of those things on the phenomena is eternally minute. Like you can expand the minute thing you got to grasp on over time, very modestly. But unless you import the findings and the discoveries into your ways of knowing, it produces traps. And the traps are very compelling and sticky, and cognitively and emotionally gravidic. So here's the thing. So one of the entailments of relativity, which by the way doesn't mean everything is relative. That's a misinterpretation of the theory, I think. It means that you should consider the features of situations. Actually, I don't know what it means. My personal take is that you should consider the features of situations that are relative when you're thinking about the results and expectations and interpretation systems of science, and particularly physics and math. The math is a very special knowledge domain for humans. It's not the only one where there's something resembling explicit truth, and it's not entirely free. It's not context free, it's explicit truth within the realm of human behavior and cognition. It's a form of representational thought. But of all the forms, it gets you closest to something like explicit truth within the confines of mathematics. And also in the way that mathematics overlaps with phenomenal existence and experience. In the podcast I was listening to, the young woman who was opposing the preferred perspective of the young man, both of whose names I cannot recall, described a situation where the mathematical predictions produced an expectation opposite of the outcome in some cases, and in line with the outcome in other cases. And it's not hard to produce an experimental situation that demonstrates this principle. And so the problem is that local to a specific experimental context, containment, right, exclusion, there are variables that are not being accounted for from one perspective. But from another perspective, it's as if it's like the dandelion, right? The impossible leaks into the possible, leaking into the probable, leaking into the likely, leaking into the semi-deterministic, leaking into the physicalization. And in that process, what you must have are anomalies that actually defy all previous expectations. You must have these. And when people think about the phenomena, right, UFOs and anomalous experience, they want to either figure out what it is or if it isn't. And that's silly. Because, again, the humans don't have the faintest idea what anything is. They have names for things, but it doesn't help you understand ontically. Why are they there? Where do they come from? What generates them? What is their nature? And all of those questions are infinitely deep. So you can make some progress in representational thought. And then you can get really excited about your progress and become dogmatic or scientistic. And this is mostly the story of modernity. Though there are mavericks all over the place here. We have 8 billion people. It's maverick wonderland. So it's as if any location, moment, situation, world line of related histories and futures, they come together and they do an experiment and they make some findings. And those findings are reproducible, meaning that they're sort of the lowest level findings. Findings that are reproducible are findings about the kind of Newtonian and I don't know, it's not true. They're findings in the layer that representational cognition favors, left hemisphere-like ways of being in the world. But there are always other findings. And occasionally a situation will produce opposite findings, or findings that draw deeply into question, if not the results of previous experiments, the interpretations of them. This will always be the case. There's no other way. The game is infinitely deep and is responding to your moves as if it were intelligent, whether it is or not. So the humans have this idea, no, we're separate and we're doing tests on something outside of us. Or they have the other side of the problem, no, everything's consciousness. Right? And both of those things are incomplete and deceptive as dogmas. So what I want to get at is there are entailments of relativity that should have been imported into the way we think about our experience and our evaluations and the methods we use to compose them. And one of them that I find very compelling is the entailments of the concept of world lines. And to state it very simply, you can look into world lines in relativity if you're interested in this topic. I suggest that you do. It's very surprising. So the basic simple version is that two observers, because they represent unique world lines and cannot inhabit directly each other's world line, though thankfully there's a position above from which that's not only possible, it's most of what's going on. But at this layer or in this register that gives us the world line model, which has to do with light cones and what light can reach and not reach, so forth. The uniqueness of each organism's world line generates both novelty and particularly uncertainty in sequence. One of the more intelligent people I've ever come across claimed, I don't know if this is true, that relativity's original motivating purpose, it's a very interesting perspective even if it's not true, was to synchronize distant clocks. So here's the thing. If you have two observers standing right next to each other and somebody flashes a light signal at them, it will not arrive at the same time. It will not be perfectly the same for both observers. Their position in the light cone is distinct, even though it's partly unified by location. And so you can't necessarily tell, and this is a gross simplification, whether it occurs, whether John sees the light. Of course, if the difference is minimal enough, then for normal, real world effective purposes, we can imagine that Jane and John both see the light at the same time, but they don't. They are a privileged position in time-space. And this is, I think, called the principle of non-simultaneity, and I think there's another principle of simultaneity, but I'm not going to expound on that because I have a very specific goal here. So, basically, the difference in world lines necessitates a unique perspective in temporality, and what this does, in effect, is it creates a situation where not only does each organism, say we have two cells, receive the stimuli temporally uniquely, it actually produces a situation where the nature of time is a totally different thing. Right? Where the nature of time transforms based on the number and kinds of organisms and other participants, including stones and trees and things, that you have in the system. Each of those relational manifolds within and between those organisms produces new forms of time. And as I've argued before, the Earth, because of the incredible biological diversity here, and the hypersymmetric relational to call that, I usually call it a hyperstructures, but I already used the phoneme hyper, the morpheme hyper. Yeah, it produces a thing that makes new forms of time, and any intelligence in time-space with aliens or anything would be super protective of that. That's an asset that gets transmitted through the whole structure of time-space. So, just like light, right? You get modes of time created by the biologies on Earth. But even that, which is one of my favorite topics, is not what I'm here to discuss today. It's that the same problem with simultaneity, that two observers are they're synchronized in some ways and they're desynchronized in others, and they don't experience the signal at precisely the same instant. You flash a light at them. Partially due to the nature of world lines. Now, there are connections between world lines, That doesn't solve the problem. It makes it weirder or more interesting. It's usually what I mean by weird. So you can sense from this description that it implies a very different universe from the ones that humans normally think about, especially if they're still thinking in Newtonian terms. There are modes of unity over the distinction, but those don't exist without the distinction, too. Right? So it's the same thing with gender. Yeah. There's modes of unity over the distinction, but you can't throw the distinctions away just because you don't like them, or you think it's a bunch of patriarchal, nonsense. And similarly, think, it's a bunch of matriarchal nonsense. It's liberal. It's conservative, whatever nonsensical. I mean, real at its layer, but nonsensical above that derivation one's trying to make, usually because of being offended or frightened or vulnerable or insecure. All of which are features that I myself experience as being, So the thing is, I'm really failing to get the point across here. I haven't found a good metaphor. It's part of the problem. Joe and Jane standing right next to each other. A light flashes off to their left. Jane's a little leftward, so the light reaches her first. It doesn't reach her at the same time, or in exactly the same way it reaches Joe. And this creates a situation where, from one perspective, each being is a universe, right? Composed of their world line and all of the historical and futurial relationships that emerge from that participant's world line. So we know from relativity that simultaneity isn't the way we think about it. And there's lots of ways that this has been experimentally validated and proven. But there's a weirder feature, which is that qualia, the felt sense of character, threat, opportunity, asset, deficit, has to be unique to each moment of each world line. So you think you know who Joe is because you saw him yesterday. And you've known Joe for many years. You guys hang out all the time. But one day Joe shows up and he's not Joe. He doesn't match up with your derivations over the continuum of Joe. And presents as an entirely different, could be an entirely different person, but it could also be an entirely different being, a non-human being. Our humanity is provisional.
When we're on the bridge, we don't really have a
The degree to which we match any derivative in language or concept is both minimal and variable. Right? That's a kind of categorical derivation, right? You got a lexicon, you got a phenomena. This term in the lexicon refers to this category of phenomena. You dial it down, right? From its everything to its something to it's an entity, right? It's a whole, W-H-O-L-E. It's also an H-O-L-E. I'm going to leave that alone. It's a being. It's an organism. It's a tree. It's X species of tree. It's an exemplar of the species. It's local to this place. It has this ancestral generative history, not just including the beings that it is the reproductive result of, but also including all the beings with whom they interacted and were transformed by, right? It's a manifold. So it's this kind of tree, then it's in this location, encountered at this time. It was in this state when I encountered it, right? You can dial down the derivations representationally. All of those things, the representational aspect, mostly evict participation, and they also evict insight because they channel cognition into one kind of outcome, which is a lexical match, a series of evaluations where you're throwing away most of what's going on every time you make a move, and then you throw away most of what's left and you make another move. And you just keep doing that till you get a reductivist outcome. This is as useful and compelling as it is unfortunate. You don't want to throw it away, but you definitely don't want to live in that system. So the thing about Jane and Joe and their world lines is that perspective and purpose are everything. They determine what you can become aware of. In other words, they determine the scope of your participation in phenomena, not the type of phenomena it is. Right? If you're just looking for types, you're throwing away the participatory, except to the degree that you're participating as a representational cognitive. So it's not just the temporality that is of a signal that is unique to Joe and Jane. The uniqueness of their world lines demands that the features of experience are unique to them. Probably much more unique in almost every case, although you can dial the aperture down to basic stuff, right? Like weight, heat, toxicity, and so forth, that they'll both agree because the aperture is like tight enough. Right? They'll both agree on the phenomenon. So what this means is that we don't have anyway, a method of it means that what's going on in physics is psi-epistemic. It's not psiontic. What we have are knowledge systems, tokens, methods, words, algorithms, math, and so forth, that we can diddle with phenomena with. But if we mistake the results of that for the truth, we become very confused. Also, the concept that consciousness is separate, or that a human being is separate from that which is being observed, or that we can establish enough separation between a human being and the observables that we can get a really clear, quote unquote, grasp on them, is both modestly true and wildly deceptive. If it weren't true at all, we couldn't make machines. So it's true. But what's the scope of the truth? And what kind of truth is it? Lots of different kinds of truth. So what that means is that each cohort of humans, or each unique person or situation, is naturally is the result of novelty. There's just as much novelty in there, probably a lot more, than there is regularization. But the regularization reduces ambiguity, which turns the volume down on ignorance, right? It's like an equalizer with music. And the humans are very interested in evicting ambiguity, producing a reliable grasp on something, making machines about it to kill other beings with, and so forth. It doesn't have to be the only purpose of our technique, but it's the one that pervades over most of the big picture stuff at the species level. I came across... Oh, by the way, small groups of humans can reorganize the local cognitium in such a way as to produce superfunction. In other words, to grease, to lubricate the gravity of previously produced certainties. And they do this all the time. Sports teams and rock bands are great examples of this. So are cops, soldiers. They channel the sort of the spirit of emergence into particular structures and forms. But the problem is they then think that this tells them what the universe is. Right? The way they channeled it worked so well that, and it's so reproducible, that they come to think like, oh, we figured it out. No, you didn't figure it out. You half created it by orienting your perspective and purpose in a certain way, just like I'm doing now. So the features that we derive from existence depend on really strange stuff like world lines and their incredible complexity, their original, futurial, and relational complexity. And this is where most of our mistakes in ontic and epistemological concerns arise. We think that there are facts, and it's not that there aren't, but the scope of purchase of those facts is much more limited and of a very different nature than we presume, if we presume the humans are separate and they're just looking at stuff and figuring out what it is. The other night I was writing and I said something like, probably 99% of the time you don't exist. And the thing you think is you is a unique collapsed state of a blur over all beings in all of time. And most of you is that blur. And that is impossible. It's also true. So the localization is the tiniest part of who you are. And if you understand this, you will realize that the ways that humans usually think and speak about phenomena are nonsensical, and it's not like you'd never engage in them again, but you'd engage in them from a position outside them that understands this provisionality and relates intelligently with it. I'm going to pause here for a bit. We'll see what happens next. So I was reading something this morning in Ian McGilchrist's The Matter with Things. First half of the first volume is fairly boring and repetitive, but there's some insight in there as well. But the second half is improving, as I was expecting. And you know, those of us who are concerned with intelligence, its natures, enacting it, discovering it, becoming it, and what I call cognitive activism, which is, you know, my shtick. Right, I'm an activist about how we perceive and evaluate and relate with phenomena. Here's the Birdman. That guy is a bird savant. He's very autistic-y, spectrum-y, but he's capable of paying forms of attention to birds that ordinary humans will never approach in 100 lifetimes. I wish I could just be in his mind for a moment. I would like very much to. I think it is possible. Probably not just trying hard enough. Anyway, I was reading and you know, the humans are an expression of the natures and features and characters and priorities of origin, and of the planet and the sun and all the local situations. I'm in a goose flock and there's a raven. The goose flock is on my right and the raven is on my left. And this raven knows me. But it's also cautious because there's a lot going on. I've always been a bit spectrum-y myself. There's lots of different ways that manifests in my character, personality, behavior. And one of the most confusing things in my life about being this way is that it's not really, I mean, all of us have a share of misfortune and suffering. And for some of us, particularly the poor, quote unquote, money is so stupid. But some of us have mostly just suffering. And that can be physical, emotional, both, relational. There's all kinds of flavors of suffering that beings can experience. So we do have something like an array, a library of roles that are natural to the kinds of beings and organisms and animals and humans that we are. And throughout my life, I've been a bit hyperlexic, good with language. Would have been amazing if I could have become polylingual. I suppose I still could, though I do speak music. But yeah, I saw the word proofreading, and this is something I've done. And, you know, I have some unusual knowledge about the developmental histories and unique features in those histories that produced the situations that we are in today. The topic of the origin of consciousness in our species. And I definitely do not think it's much like what the ordinary folks like to think. Ancient humans were like us. They thought like us. Their concerns were the same. Nothing like this is even possible. It's obvious just from looking at indigenous You can cherry pick which indigenous cultures you want to talk about. Throwing them all together in a bucket is kind of dumb, right? It's a false generalization. But the indigenous peoples clearly evinced awareness of many of the things that I speak of, particularly the danger of taking language literally, using it literally, obeying what it tells you, right? For example, yesterday Joe and I were fighting, therefore today Joe is my enemy. There's no play in that, right? It dishonors the nature of being, origin, communion, remembering, relation, participation, love. And so it occurred to me earlier today that we might be like nature's proofreaders in a way. Right? We have the capacity to move things that get out of hand back toward communion. And every organism has a similar capacity, but ours is a bit superpositional over that manifold set. It's uniquely superpositional, and our capacity for representational thought could be used in service of that. It's unfortunately very rarely done. I'm trying to do that here. It's an attempt. We'll see how it goes. You tell me. Your mileage may vary. But yeah, so it occurred to me something like this principle that I'm very clumsily sketching here. We are, in nature, very much like gods. And I don't say this in the sense of that supports human hubris, anthropocentrism, and these kinds of things. It's not where I'm at. But there are very unique features to our kind of organism. And I've asked questions about this when Toymaker was with my mind. And Toymaker is neverly, that's a really interesting word, neverly. I mixed the two words that I was intending to emit in sequence. Is never entirely gone from me. And in fact, if I ask myself, why did Toymaker leave my mind, my spirit, my soul? And why was Toymaker only there for over an interval? Lots of interesting potentials emerge. And one of them is that it was a transmission event, in the sense that Toymaker put seeds in me of their minds and their ways of being and what they attend and their perspectives that could flourish in the human layer. Right? And then, so when I'm making these recordings, I'm trying to transmit some of those seed features into other minds. And if you think carefully, you'll see that this is how humans relate generally, right? The whole letters thing, it's like putting seeds in other minds at a distance, using light across time and space to forge structures in other minds, other people's interiorities. But yeah, this proofreading thing is compelling. Not in the sense of somebody who edits a text, but someone who can, a kind of animal that where and if things go awry, relationally or biologically or ecologically or cognitively, the humans have the capacity to ameliorate that. And not just because we have opposable thumbs and representational cognition. The form of awareness that we are privileged with and should never be the kind of trap-like labyrinth that most of us will live in. That form of awareness is unique among the animals and could be understood as something that the planet produces
Remember I told you?
in a purposeful way, right? Not with one purpose. Nature never works this way. There's a layer where you could see single purposes, but it's not what's going on. Nature's always multi-purposive and generating new possibility spaces for new kinds of purpose and so on. So this is my view, what I understand. But I asked Toymaker about these things, and he made many astonishing suggestions that I don't have time to explore right now. I may explore some of them futurely. Or if you want, you can ask a question and I'll respond in the YouTube thread. So the proofreading concept is only minimally appropriate, but there's a resemblance there that I think is trippy, particularly because I've always been something of a proofreader. I think for today, I have come to the place where I will make the spiral that leads to the conclusion of this talk. I'm so grateful for this time together to seek and unforget, to remember one another, our origins, natures, purposes, potentials, intelligences, and opportunities to liberate our people in this world from the very dire and strange forces that appear to have largely captured them. Situations, perhaps, rather than forces. So please take a moment, tickle the algorithm, like, subscribe, comment, question, ask a question, I'll respond. Criticize me. I love a good castigation. Yeah, share if you want, support my efforts, which will always be provided free and unmonetized and without any advertising that I have agreed to. I wish you every beautiful and liberating way of life and mind, heart and spirit, relation, opportunity, and the fulfillment of the promises, potentials of your human incarnation, and all of your incarnations. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning and growing and seeing together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.